My generation's got to get out of the way. Because you're 80 or you're 75 years old, that does not make, and you've been there for a long time. Sure, you know how to do things. We need a fresh perspective. The future belongs to people who are 25, not 85 or 75. There's a spirit about being a Vermonter, and some people pick it up after 6 months, and some people never pick it up even after 3 generations.
Hello, Vermont. I'm Andy Julo.
And I'm Joanna Grossman.
And this is There's No A in Creemee.
Vermont politics, culture, and beyond.
Thanks for joining us.
Hey, folks. Welcome back to There's No A in Creemee. Thanks for joining us. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing great. What episode is this?
This is episode 1,000. This is episode 9.
Feels like 1,000?
No, it's 9. It's so great.
Yes.
We're almost to double digits.
Yeah. There's like a top analytics section. There's like a top 10 episodes, and I want to start bumping the ones off the bottom, like start having competition.
Oh, yeah. Love that. How's your house going? Your house building project?
It's going okay. I poured the footer, and I ended up with some concrete burns, and I had to kind of tend to that. So it didn't end up as smooth and level as I needed to be. So I'm going to have to do a second pouring of the footer. It's going to be really overbuilt, but that's okay.
You sustained injuries for this house.
I did. This is the first injury. I shouldn't say this. First injury I've sustained in this whole process.
We're knocking on wood over here.
Yeah, I've been on the roof. I've done concrete work. I've done framing. I've used hammers. I mean, I've hit my thumb.
Right.
A lot.
Yeah.
But it's always bounced back. I haven't had to go to the emergency room yet. This wasn't quite emergency room worthy.
That's ideal.
I met you for a drink.
Yes.
And I figured we had that on the calendar because we had an organization meeting.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'll go there. And she'll understand if I say, I'm going to go to the hospital. Yeah.
Except I didn't really understand you keeping the appointment at all because you had sustained chemical burns. That level of dedication to a meeting was a little foreign to me, but I appreciated it still.
If I was going to be in pain and discomfort, I might as well be talking to you as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have a big holiday coming up, 4th of July.
Yeah.
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 I've always had a complicated relationship with patriotism because I kind of feel like the right wing has sort of claimed it and like planted their flag in it figuratively and literally. And it's interesting, when I worked for Indivisible, we had a lot of like internal debate about how to use the American flag emoji. Like that was kind of how it came down to, like, the rubber meets the road of digital campaigning for me.
For me, it was only the last couple of years that I really felt that took hold with the American flag, and that we started to see political floats in our local parades in the islands. It used to be very non-political.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no politics at all. And then, the Republican Party started showing up, and that was fine. It was for local representatives, kind of broke the protocol, but then we started to see trucks with Trump flags on them and things like that in the parade, and it just caused ended up kind of lighting up Front Porch Forum over the next few days, and a lot of debate about whether that was appropriate, and it got nasty, and it's just always a shame that we, something that is supposed to kind of bring us together drives us apart. So it's been unfortunate. It's gone in that direction sometimes.
Oh yeah, that is really sad.
That, and I hate fireworks. I don't hate fireworks. I just go to bed at 8:30 and I don't want to be woken up.
Oh, yeah. I can relate to that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you have this in the islands, but we have fireworks season in Burlington. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, it used to be a little annoying, but in the past few years, now every time we're was that gunshots or was that fireworks?
Yeah, let me reframe that. That's a real
drag.
I like a real fireworks show, and on July 3rd or 4th, and there's that stretch around the holiday that we all go, and that's a communal thing, and I like that.
Yeah.
It's everybody on the lake for the next month blowing off fireworks every night. They just kind of echo across the bay, and we hear them. So it's a bit exhausting. And I've had some dogs that really, it's just tough to watch them. They really get traumatized and scared and panicky.
That's so sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's a creature you love, and absolute fear and panic. And
I bet my chickens don't like it very much.
yeah, but they got Chuck there to take care of them.
They got Chuck, but I bet Chuck is pretty scared
Yeah,
too.
he probably is.
Yeah.
So we were on an interview program, one of the weekly news magazines, local, My Champlain Valley, What Matters This Week.
Yeah, it was so fun.
It was. That should be out now online. And it was fun. We got interviewed. The tables were turned on us.
Yeah.
I found the hardest question was when she asked what my Creemee order was. I don't know why.
Oh.
I was 100% unprepared for that question.
Oh, interesting.
And then she stared me down when I said no sprinkles.
She kind of did.
She definitely did.
Yeah,
Yep.
That's right. I totally forgot that. Yeah, she was all in on sprinkles. It is surprising to me how divisive that issue is.
Yeah. People
Never
have
saw that
very
coming.
strong opinions about it.
Yeah.
This is a live and let live state.
Yeah.
But apparently when it comes to sprinkles, all bets are off.
Yeah, it's really surprising. Yeah, that was a really fun appearance. It's funny, like after all these years of managing campaigns, like my candidates have been on every network, every show, in every studio, but I have not been in that chair before. So that was kind of fun for me.
Yeah, I had never been interviewed with somebody else at the same time. So you and I, we had to do a quick glance to each other to see who was going to answer
Right.
the question, pass
Yeah.
it back. Fortunately, we've gotten kind of
We're kind of used to that.
hand signals going here to
Right.
know when to pass it back and forth. And I think it worked. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. No, I think we did a good job.
Yeah.
We'll see. You guys can tell us if we did a really bad job.
We also got to try one of the legendary Creemees in the States.
Oh,
Palmer. Yeah, Palmer's
Yeah.
Maple Creemee the other night.
Yeah. So we, on Friday, we got together and we went to the South End Get Down, which is like, we just call it the food trucks in my neighborhood. And there's like a Friday night scene. And yeah, Palmer's had a truck and we got Creemees. And we learned once again that I'm not capable of consuming a Creemee, and it was embarrassing.
It's all right, but I
Yeah,
think we
thank
need
you.
to practice.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some more on the list. So Palmer's is one of the ones that I've heard about. And Bragg Farm in East Montpelier is another one.
Right.
I think Allenholm should be in that conversation.
Right.
And
It keeps coming up.
yes.
Howard Dean told us
Howard
today
Dean
that
is
it was
going
his
to
favorite.
back that up
Yeah.
in this episode later
Yeah.
in the interview portion.
Yep.
So that's on the
Spoiler
list.
alert.
Yeah, and we discovered. I think that I don't even know if you'd call them sprinkles, but the maple has like they take maple candy, crunch it up, and put it on there, and that's what Palmer's did.
Yeah. I
And-
still haven't had those because I didn't get that. I got rainbow.
Yeah, Allenholm has like some kind of I don't know if it's maple candy or some kind of maple crunchy thing, and I did get that last time I went. So
They're pretty.
they are.
It's just got like a Vermont look.
It made me wonder though, did the sprinkles hold the heat, and that's what causes the melting on your Creemee? Why you struggle with it so much? Maybe you should try without sprinkles.
I think that's a very
come to our team.
generous. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I definitely like consumed some soft serve when I was a kid. There was a place near my dad's house that had soft serve. I know how you feel about that term.
I'm cringing over here.
I know. But I used to get it now and then, and I don't remember it being such a challenge. So it's like, once I really became a city girl, I like lost that skill. I like gave it up in favor of navigating the subway or something. I don't know.
Yeah, two things. So I wondered, first of all, I mean, that used to happen to me all the time when I was a toddler,
Sure. Thank you.
but I don't know if that's age or just experience with the Creemee. And you may be, your Creemee age may be toddler, like a reading level. It may be very low
Okay.
because you haven't gotten enough of them under your belt. Because I have to say,
Thank you.
Corinne did me proud. She polished that thing off perfectly.
Yeah.
There was nothing
Like a
on
boss.
her. Absolutely nothing
Yeah.
on her clothes. She did a great job. What was the other thing I was going to say?
There was another thing that was wrong with me about how I consume Creamies.
Exactly.
You could just compile a list, and that could be our last licks next time. And
We'll come
totally,
back to it. Oh,
yeah.
I remember what it was. So, not all ice creams are created equal. So I think the Vermont Creemee has a little different composition than what might be considered soft serve. And there's
Consult episode 1.
Absolutely. Like if you go to McDonald's and you get their ice cream, like you can put that stuff in the microwave and it won't melt. So
Yeah.
there's definitely different variations of how much dairy is in there.
Yes.
And I think we go pretty heavy in Vermont with the air and the fat content,
Yeah.
and that can melt fast.
So, I mean, you may be right that Creemee to Creemee, our Creamees have a higher melt and drip rate. However, all four of us consumed the same product. So that's not really an excuse for me.
I was trying to be generous.
I know. Well, I wasn't used to
That's
that.
the last
so
time.
I was confused.
Okay, yeah. I can see where that might have thrown you.
So I don't know if you saw, there was a really fascinating piece in 7 Days, a really amazing story where it followed two freshman legislators, House members, through the legislative session. And one of them was Sean Sweeney, who is a member of the Chittenden County delegation. So I like to think of them as mine, right? So he was like one of mine, being the county chair. And Sean is a very tall, very nice guy. And
He came out door knocking with me.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And he comes to all the Chittenden Dems fundraisers, and he used to heckle me because he won a Howard Dean tie in one of the events, and then I didn't give it to him for ever, and then I finally found had it in my bag for a long time, found him in the State House caf and just turned over his tie in a Ziploc bag. Yeah.
Somebody else we know would say you welshed on that.
Ouch. But yeah, it was a really interesting piece, and it kind of shared some, I would recommend listeners listen to it. It was sort of illuminating about, what it's like to be a freshman and how much pressure there is to sort of get in line with leadership. And it's sort of it's so hard. And it was just a real reminder that every legislator comes into the session with big dreams, and they can be hard to accomplish.
Yeah, I thought it was a really well-written article, and it did walk you through the whole session. It was long, but it was worth it. It had to be long to really tell the story of a long legislative session. I mean, it's not long in months, but it's definitely got a season and a cycle to it. And especially your first time, you come in with all the hope and expectations in the world, and some of those get dashed along the way.
Yeah, I thought it was a really great piece. I mean, once in a while there's some standout political reporting in Vermont, and that was definitely one of those. One of the things I really liked about it is that Sean has a day job like me, and I have it's kind of a special place in my heart for legislators who have day jobs.
Yeah, well, they both did in that story.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
he
right.
Was, he was going to National Life, Michael Booten.
Yeah, that's right. I just don't know him, so it wasn't the same. But now I feel like I know him, I guess, because I've read it. So we have a really great episode lined up today. We interviewed the one and only Howard Dean. That was really fun.
Vermont original.
He's extraordinary, truly. And he's been so kind to both of us over the years. He's been a mentor and friend to me, which is if 15 years ago, I heard myself say that, I'd be that's a bunch of nonsense. It's just kind of amazing. And he did so much for us during the campaign too. So it was really fun to get to see him and talk to him a little bit. Yeah, cool. We hope you guys enjoy it. Welcome to There's No A in Creemee, Governor Dean. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to share a little of our backstory before we get into some questions, but obviously there's a lot going on in the state and the country that we want to ask you about. So you and I got to know each other a little bit when I was running Chris Winter's campaign for Secretary of State. But even before that, I think you know this story already, but you were the first political donation that I ever made when I was in college, and you were running for president. And I was like, that guy's cool. And don't forget, I'm not a Vermonter. I was living in New York, and I was like, yeah. So when I actually met you and I was running Chris and got in your face about trying to get an endorsement, I was on the inside, I was having a little bit of fangirl at the same time. And then
feel it well.
Well, I did. That's good to hear. And then, when I became county chair, you just became so supportive, and it's been so wonderful to get to know you, and I just appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was the job I had. My first elected job in Vermont was Chittenden County chair. Actually, it's not true. I was elected delegate for Jimmy Carter.
Oh, and then you were county chair?
And then I became county chair.
Can I talk about the first time I met Howard?
Oh, you have to.
Oh, you probably don't remember it all, but 1990, I was in my 6th grade classroom, and I know my teacher, Charlie Farrell, walked in with you and said, "Oh, here's the Vermont Lieutenant Governor," and you spoke to us for a little bit. And then the end of that school year, I was walking through Groton State Park. I was on a summer camp that was 3 days of canoe and then 3 days of hiking, and they would resupply halfway through. And then that resupply was when the camp staffer said, Richard Snelling has just died, and Howard Dean is now the governor.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I think my sister was on your daughter's hockey team in one of the early Baja female teams, and that's the first time I got to shake your hand. I was a little starstruck at that time.
So you know how that ended? I was the coach of the, I forgot what they were called, the Mites or something. And it was a co-ed team, and then it went on to become a girls team and a boys team differently. But so the co-ed team, the rule was everybody got to play the same amount of time, no matter how good they were. And my kids were quite good, and they were a defensive team. And there was this incredible team. These are all 6-year-olds. There was an incredible guy in the other team who was from Eastern Europe and who could skate. He looked like a New York Ranger out there. And he would just blow by everybody. And anyway, the game was tied with 2 minutes to go. And my kids were out there. And Lexi, this fantastic kid from Eastern Europe, was out there, which was unnecessary. And my kids were both quite good. They both went on to be very successful in higher levels of hockey. And so that was the match. But the clock hit, and I took them off and put the third team on, whereupon Lexi blew them away and scored the winning goal against me. And my kids jumped up in unison and said, Dad, you don't know what you're doing. And I thought to myself, it's true. I don't know what I'm doing. I never played hockey. I shouldn't be coaching. And I was just really minding the store. And so that I quit. And that was the end of my coaching.
There you go. That's what happened to my dad, too. That's what happens when you show up in the stands.
Oh, yeah. So, you're a former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and I feel like it's a tense time for Democrats in this country. And you've been on the scene a lot longer than Andy and I, and we're grateful for that. And so, how do you think we're doing? Is it really as bad as we think it is?
Well, as bad as we think it is, because you have a guy who essentially doesn't believe in democracy as the president of the United States, and surrounded himself with a capable team, unlike the last time, has surrounded himself with a team capable of executing democracy, which is what they're doing. Yeah. But I think a lot of stuff that's going on in the Democratic Party is very good. Look, the last place you're going to get any reform is Washington. Right. The problem with the Democratic Party is we talk to the same old consultants, and we have for 30 years, and it's always the same formula. Give me a lot of money and I'll provide you with such and such a service. And it's sort of an inner loop that keeps repeating itself, and there's no real connection with the outside. I do think that the primary win of Mamdani in New York is very a good sign. You don't have to agree with his politics, but it means that young people are willing to go out there and make a difference. And that's the first time I've seen that. Now, who knows if it holds up in the general election? We can talk about that if you want to. But the young people, we can't survive with the baby boomers running everything. I mean, I've embraced a few conservative positions, one of which is I think we ought to have term limits for every senator and every congressman. And that's coming from Vermont, that's a real sacrifice, because we just, Pat Leahy was about the 5th biggest industry in Vermont. He was fantastic, but it's destroying the country. And we got to have term limits for the Supreme Court judges, which is more complicated, but it's doable. The Supreme Court is a disaster. It's essentially bought and paid for by the Republican Party over the last 20 years. And they're really not a serious court. They're just a rubber stamp for Republican ideas. So we're in deep trouble. I do sense some changes at the grassroots. And the essential part is that young people have got to get involved and throw their weight around. And it's time for my generation to leave politics, I think.
Tough talk.
It's true.
Do you think the rest of your generation is on board with that?
I think they're increasingly on board with that, just because the ones that are in Washington aren't. I always say about Washington, it's basically middle school on steroids. They're smart, they work hard, and it's all about them all the time. And they're just out of touch with what's going on in the rest of the country. Even the smart people that I like, they're just out of touch.
So I'm curious what you think about here in Vermont. As you know, we lost 26 seats in the last election, and the Democratic caucuses did in total. And that was pretty rough. And I'm curious what you feel like the remedy is to pick those up and if we're doing it.
Well, look, I think the remedy is to get out locally and talk about things like the environment. But Phil Scott is right. It's the taxes that are killing the Democrats. So I think, and Phil's very adroit at blaming other people for his own shortcomings.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we just got to get out there and talk to people about what they're worried about. And the Democrats are not solely at, blameless here. I mean, some of the ideas that are coming in are just, some of the taxation ideas. We're going to tax everybody who makes more than whatever it is and have a special income tax for them. The taxes are already high in the state. What do you get out of doing that? And so you get, the left in our party, my problem is they can't take yes for an answer. And it always has to be a little bit more and a little bit more and push everybody. Mm-hmm. So that represents the whole party. Well, the average party person is not all that far left. I think I was very proud of the legislature's work especially on the environment, which Phil vetoed, which I think was a major mistake. And I think they did a lot of good work when they had a veto-proof majority, but they couldn't control the spending, and that was a big problem. And then the tax problem. I don't think the solution that they've come up with for the schools is ideal. I think there are some good things in it, and I think something had to pass. And I'm not in a panic about it because they have 3 or 4 years to implement it. And I'm also not in a panic about the private education system because I actually think it's been limited, although there's some things in there I wouldn't like about it. But to get rid of spending money for the out-of-state schools, I think is great. And there'll be actually fewer kids going to private school on our dime than there were before, which I think is very good. And they had to let that continue to happen because in St. Johnsbury and in Manchester, in that area, private schools, there is no public high school, and private schools have been the way they've done it for years, and I don't think it would be fair to undo it. But there's just been a lot of mistakes. One of the mistakes was to buy down the property tax rate, and we did it again this year. That only puts off the misery. So, there's just a ton of stuff that is falling through the cracks, and I don't know if we'll lose more seats or we won't. There's a lot of stuff to run on. And I think we're just going to have to keep our nose to the grindstone and try to have a strong session next year.
In our last episode, which you mentioned you were listening to before we went on air, it was right. Yeah, it was suggested that this private and public, these two tracks that are even separated in statute, that maybe what we really need to do is unify those first before we can really affect change in the system. Do you think those two need to come together, or can they be maintained separately?
What do you mean by come together? I don't know.
I think it would be not have schools or districts that have closed their schools and voucher to independent schools and have just a public education system.
Well, that means you'd have to close down 2 pretty big schools, Burton and St. Johnsbury Academy. I don't see how you do that. I mean, you'd have to completely restructure in 2 districts, 2 pretty substantial schools, which are actually quite good schools. So, I just don't see getting rid of publicly based education that's run by private people. We've done this for years and years, and I think it was great to get rid of let's send your kid to Andover and we'll pay some of the money.
Yep.
But I don't see how you get rid of an entire school system.
Yeah, no, I think those were the arguments that were put forward. There's also Linden and Thetford, so there's a lot of historic academies that have been.
I forgot about that. Yeah. That's true.
Yep. I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned in Alberg last fall during the closing days of the campaign. You were talking about the number of vetoes that we've seen over the last decade or so, and how that sort of represents a lack of communication. That if there is free-flowing communication between the legislature and the governor, that you have less vetoes because nobody really wants that outcome to begin with. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you approach that.
The way I always did it is instead of having the legislature originate legislation, I usually did. And they'd pick it apart, and sometimes they wouldn't pass it, and sometimes they'd pass something very differently. I think it got out of control after I left with the Act 60 decision. That was passed while I was governor, but it wasn't implemented until after I left. And you're going to have major education reform from time to time. Our schools are fairly average in their output, but they're among the most expensive per pupil in the country. So that's not a good situation. Something's got to be done about that. And I know last week there was a lot of complaining about, the public schools should be fixed, by the local people, but they're never going to do that because you have different sets of local people that have different needs. Burlington is a completely different place, say, than Thetford or Bennington or whatever, and or the Northeast Kingdom. And the needs are completely different. So if you're going to have a unified school system, the only place you can solve a problem like that actually is in politics, because everybody has to give something and everybody has to give up something in order to make it. That's how politics works. So I don't think it's a bad thing to have legislators writing this. And I think it's a really good thing when the governor proposes a solution, because that gives the legislature guidelines. And actually the process kind of worked, but it kind of broke down towards the end of the session. And that, I think, is a product of having a new Secretary of Education, who may be good and may not be good, but nobody trusted her when she came in for a lot of reasons. And so the process is pretty bad, but the general overview of the process is kind of the way it has to be done. This has to be done by the legislature and the governor, because it's a political process and it's a resource allocation process. And that's what politics is for. Everybody hates politicians, but they perform a very useful solution. They represent you when you go, and they do the best they can. And they have to make compromises with other people, and that's how it's supposed to work.
Did you have thoughts or prior experiences that were similar with the conference committees breaking with the bills that had been passed by the caucuses? And had you seen another time when caucus leadership had gone with the minority instead of the rest, like the bulk of the caucuses?
No, I've never seen a process like this, but this process was a mess from the beginning. I mean, this process started 4 years ago, and it was a mess from the beginning. So, but the answer is no, I've never seen anything like the end of this session. We'll say I've never been overridden.
Yeah.
Although, in fairness, the reason they have a veto override session now is because they didn't before. So I'd collect all the bills, and then some of them I vetoed because they were just terrible English and they were so badly written that you couldn't tell what they did. So in fairness, I was the one that was responsible for them adding the veto session so they could see if they could override the vetoes. Before that, there was really no override unless I vetoed something during the session.
That's interesting.
Or they could come, if it was the first year of the biennium, they could try to come back and try to do it when they got back. But that, of course, never worked. But on the other hand, I never vetoed anything that was enormous. It was just sort of pain in the butt stuff that was badly written, or there weren't that many philosophical differeces, but the things were a lot different in those days. There was not that much difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. We had a big Act 60, of course, is legendary, and we lost a ton of seats and the majorities in both the House and the Senate as a result of Act 60. And then, so there was what passed at that time for a conservative legislature. The speaker was a really good guy, actually, named Walter Freed, who ran a business in Manchester or Dorset, Republican. And that we used to have our tax system maxed to the feds, or attached to the feds. So when the feds, G.W. Bush came in and dropped taxes, which of course he couldn't pay for, but he did it anyway, then our tax revenues were going to go down. And I went to Walter and I said, look, if we're going to either have a huge deficit, or we're going to have to unhitch ourselves from this federal system, which is unpredictable. And he said, yep, we need to do it. We got to balance the budget. It's the only fair way to do it. We won't have a tax increase. And I said, no, we won't. But we are going to have a tax rate increase to make up for the drop in the feds. And he got it passed right through the Republican legislature. Now, I can't imagine that happening today, because it just wasn't as partisan when I was governor.
I'm curious. So what would you tell a friend or a neighbor, or even, I know you have a number of grandchildren, a grandchild who was thinking about, I want to fix this country. I want to get involved. I want to do something. Like, what would you tell them?
Get out there and run.
To run for office?
Absolutely. I'd start with the school board and the city council and all that kind of stuff. Get out there and run.
Yeah.
If you're sitting back and think somebody else is going to do it as a dirty business, guess what? You kind of forfeit your right to be part of the discussion. So you got to get out there and you got to run.
Yeah.
And I hope people who are 25 are running.
Yeah.
Or 20.
Going back to your conversation about the baby boomers, I mean, they're holding the water right now at the local level. There are so many.
Yeah, well, they got to
positions.
get out. They got to be pushed out. One of the reasons I'm so interested in the New York mayor's race is because the young people have finally decided to push out the usual old politicians. And I have no idea if this guy's going to be a good mayor or not, but he's smart. And I think it's about time. And I like some of these younger Congress people that are running. My generation's got to get out of the way. Because you're 80 or you're 75 years old, that does not make, and you've been there for a long time. Sure, you know how to do things. We need a fresh perspective. The future belongs to people who are 25, not 85 or 75. And so I want to see those people, and I want to have my generation stop sticking it to people who are trying to get into the process and making it more difficult, because they're becoming increasingly irrelevant, and they can't quite get that if they don't get out of the way, everybody's going to pay a big price.
I mean, I really appreciate you saying that, because this is like personal to me a little bit, but I can say that as county chair, a lot of people, I'm sure you went through this too, like people come to me like expressing interest in running for office. And also like when I ran my own campaign services agency for 5 years, people would come to me and say, oh, I want to run for office, but I'm waiting for an open seat because there is so much pressure here not to primary incumbents. And a lot of our incumbents are getting older. And actually, as you may know, VDP blocks vote builder access for primary challengers. So it's really hard for people to get a foothold in the primaries. And honestly, this is sort of an open question, but I'm not sure what to do about it.
Well, I think VDP better change their point of view or they won't get a lot of donations. That's for sure. I mean, why would you support an organization that doesn't allow a free and open discussion? I can understand if VDP doesn't want to support Republicans or progressives. That's understandable.
Right. Yeah.
But, everybody's presumably contributing to the Democratic Party or trying to shore them up.
Right.
In which case, everybody ought to have access to the data.
Yeah.
If it becomes an incumbent protection agency, then there's a lot of reasons not to donate to the VDP.
Yeah, I'm afraid I agree with that. So, Howard, I think I have a new job at Phoenix Books, which is
yes,
super...
congratulations. I just ordered a book from them.
Oh, yay. Thank you for your support. So it's a really interesting position because they've brought me in basically to build a campaign and a coalition to protect like small local businesses like us from basically from the oligarchy, from big online retailers who are coming in, specifically Amazon. And I'm sort of curious this is a little bit of like a crapshoot, but I'm sort of curious if you have thoughts about what policymakers in Vermont can do to help support local businesses.
Well, I'm very pleased that there's a groundswell of opposition to the Amazon warehouse in Essex. I mean, Amazon does not do Vermonters any good, although I must say their prices are a little bit better, but it's worth spending the extra money locally. And there's a great operation called MYTI, MYTI, yes, which is actually put together by a guy who was our neighbor for a long time. And you can go online and dial in MYTI, and there's a panoply of local businesses, and you can order from them just like you would from Amazon.
Yep.
So I'm all about supporting local businesses. If you can't complain about Vermont's economy if you're not supporting Vermont's economy with the purchases you make, as far as is possible. Sometimes it's not possible, but most of the time it is.
Yeah. Phoenix is partner with Mighty. Thanks for flagging that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So we did an episode a couple of episodes ago about what it means to be a real Vermonter, and it was kind of a last minute thing that Joanna thought of, and we solicited some opinions, and we got quite a few before, but then we've gotten a lot since, and it's really charged. I mean, a lot of people think you've got to be here for a long time, and others think it's about shared experiences. What does being a real Vermonter mean to you?
Well, technically, you're a real Vermonter if you were born here, maybe for 4 or 5 generations. Frank Bryan, who's a hoot, who I think might still be a professor at University of Vermont, or at least maybe he's a retired professor, about my children who are born in Vermont and lived here and grew up in this public school system and all that. He said, well, just because your cat had kittens in the oven doesn't make you a biscuit. So that's a little harsh. I think there's a spirit about being a Vermonter, and some people pick it up after 6 months, and some people never pick it up even after 3 generations. And it's kind of it's a respect for your neighbor, and a thoughtfulness. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that this is the state that Donald Trump got the fewest percentage of votes of any place in the country. And that's because we respect each other. And we work together. And negative campaigns, if you run a negative campaign for office, you're probably going to lose. Yeah. And I thank God for that. It's just a smaller place, and we do, and it's gotten a little tougher. Chittenden County, the traffic is a little bad, and there's a few middle finger salutes that go on, which I hadn't seen before. But in general, I think we still respect each other, care about each other, and are willing to come to each other's help, regardless of where our political views are. And I think there's a lot less extremism in Vermont than there is in most other places.
I like that. I like that there's a spirit to it. That's a new one, actually. We talked a lot about shared values, but that's sort of a new, that it's in you. I like that a lot.
I'm not sure it is shared values, but the values are the Vermont values. When I first came up here, I have lots of great stories about that. But you were who you were because of how you were. In other words, it wasn't if you had a lot of money, unless you were running around showing it off. Then you're just another person, and you were expected to contribute to things because you had the money to do it. But there wasn't a lot of difference between the guy that ran the snowplow and the guy that owned the carting service or whatever, who might make 10 times as much money. And we all acted accordingly. You ought to respect the guy who makes a living with his hands and driving and all that as much as you respect the successful businessman. And most successful businessmen that I knew when I was governor, who were often Republicans, but they were not the kind of Republicans, the national. They were always they're always willing to help out. They're always willing to be thoughtful. They had a point of view. It was usually a little more conservative than the Democrats, but there wasn't any chance that you couldn't work together.
You want to give him our last question?
Sure. The name of the podcast is There's No A in Creemee, so we would like to know what your favorite Creemee order is.
Allen Home Farm, and it's maple creamies.
Very good.
You are just pandering to Andy.
We have to get there.
I may be pandering to Andy, but I discovered that long before I discovered Andy, even before I saw him when he was in the 5th grade. We biked, not as much as I used to because of my age and now that I have 2 fake hips. But we bike, and our best bike ride is from my house, which is in southern Burlington, up the bike path all the way to the bridge and over the gut, and take the ferry and go up to Allen Home Farm and finish it off with a Creemee. It's about a 25-mile round trip, and it's always worth it when you have an Allen Home Creemee.
Do you get the crunchy maple sprinkles on it?
I do not. I just get plain old, and I always get a large.
Nice. I have to tell you, Howard, that my first summer in Vermont, you whizzed by me on the bike path on that exact route. I didn't see you until it was almost too late, but my friends were like, whoa, that was Howard Dean. I
wouldn't have noticed. I have to say, I took myself very seriously when I was governor. I was just like another person who, and I dressed accordingly, which I did cause a few remarks. Shall we say, was not the best dressed governor in the history of the state of Vermont. But, as long as this is a podcast, and I don't know what the time looks like, there's a couple of really great books that everybody who wanted to understand Vermont better should do.
Ooh.
And they're both biographies. One is the biography of Thomas Chittenden, and we're not talking about the state senator in Burlington.
The OG.
The first governor of Vermont was a remarkable human being. It was written by a professor at Dartmouth, whose name I can't remember, but he was also a state senator because he lived in our side of the Connecticut River. And it's the biography of Thomas Chittenden. And you'll understand why the state is the way it is and how we survived and became a state as opposed to becoming part of New York or New Hampshire. And the next is a biography of Phil Hoff, who, in my opinion, was the second most important governor in the history of the state after Thomas Chittenden. who, when this state, it was in the 60s, we were a backwater. Phil, when he first campaigned, was the first Democrat that was elected for 109 consecutive years of Republicans. He revolutionized everything in Vermont and brought us into the 20th century, not from the 19th century, but from the 18th century. Welfare, for example, was a function of the towns, not a function of the state government. Huh. They had poor farms. So if you didn't have any money, you were sent to the poor farm to work for your support.
Wow.
That was a town by town provision. And Phil Hoff changed all that. And that was in the 1960s.
Wow.
So if anybody who's listening to this really wants to understand the state, I believe you can't understand anything unless you understand the history. And the history goes back, as we all know, to 1791 and before. And so you've got to read the biography of Thomas Chittenden, our first governor, and then the biography of, which is written by Steve Terry and others, of Phil Hoff, who is passed now, but it was alive when you first came to Vermont. We actually went back to the state senate for 3 terms, which I think he didn't like very much at all, having been the governor.
Right.
But he's a remarkable person, and I really think if you want to understand Vermont, and especially if you've moved up from someplace else, you really read those two books and understand why Vermonters are the way they are.
I just want the listeners to know that even though I work for Phoenix, I did not put Howard up to recommending books, but I'm not above putting tags on them on the shelf saying you recommended them.
You really should put them on. They are both great books.
That's amazing. Howard, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners while you have the floor?
Probably, but you don't have another 3
Okay. Well, it was amazing to have you here and lovely to see you again, and we just appreciate you so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you
very much. Good luck with this.
Thank you.
Keep the A out of Creemee.
That's right.
We're trying.
All right. See ya.
Thanks, Howard.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we are really excited to revisit a recurring segment, our Glossary of Shame.
I feel like it needs theme music.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
I love the Glossary of Shame because it's not only is it great to explain these things to our friends and listeners, but also it is a reminder to us that not everyone is a power nerd. You know what I mean?
No. I do. Yes.
So we're gonna hit on a couple
I feel like it's
of those.
pointed at me though.
No, oh no,
Okay.
Oh no. I mean, you're like the policy power nerd, but I'm the politics power nerd. Like, I think that we meet right in the middle there. Okay, so we realized that with Howard Dean, we used the term vote builder.
We did.
Yes. So for Democrats in Vermont who have run for office, actually not all of them, but like for bigger campaigns generally, they use a tool called Vote Builder, which is the database that the Democratic Party builds and maintains of voter data. Now, voter data is like public access data, and they like pile it all in there, but then they have like, you know, data that campaigns collect on the fly, and they have like scoring that sometimes comes through the party that's like not very good. And well, in other states it's a little better. And some other little tidbits. What else is there about Vote Builder?
I mean, that's the crux of it. It's the database. It's the
Yeah.
access to the database, and all the parties have these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
know a
can
lot
make
about
little
us.
like maps and walk sheets. So when
Yes.
you're doing field, you cut what they call it cutting turf. So you like, you know, cut like turf, which is like a bunch of houses in a certain neighborhood, and then your candidate gets tortured walking through the neighborhood. And
You track your interactions so that
Yeah.
you're not knocking, nobody's knocking on your door 9 times from the same candidate.
ideally,
Or if you say, I don't want this, then they won't come back.
right,
You can mark
right.
that and say, I'd rather not be visited or canvassed.
Correct. Yeah, so that's what Vote Builder is. And it's also like, it's archaic too. It's also like really ancient software, and it's a little, for like tech nerds, like it's
ASPX pages.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. And it's always, apparently there was like a big scare last summer that we didn't even find out till later, that it like almost went down and
Yeah, the hamster stopped running around the wheel and
real.
yeah.
Yeah. So I have 2 other items on
else
our
you got?
list here. Let's start with conference committee. That came up when we were talking with Martine and Aaron.
Yeah.
And other times too.
Would you like me to?
I would love for you to.
So,
yeah.
a bill, as we discussed in previous episodes, goes from one chamber to the other. It starts in the House, goes to the Senate, or starts in the Senate, goes to the House. And changes are likely to be made once it's passed after crossover, which is a term we've talked about in the past,
Right.
to the bill from the original chamber that had it. And when that happens, when they're both passed, it goes to a conference committee and they look at the differences and they try to work out a report that negotiates, all right, if this body, the House did this and the Senate did this, here's what we're putting into this report and we're going to vote on.
So the conference committee is representatives of the House and the Senate that are supposed to get together and negotiate the differences into one unified
sit right across from
right?
the table from each other and negotiate piece by piece the differences between the House and the Senate version of the bill.
Yeah. And the conference report adjacent to that?
Yeah, what they've negotiated to and the positions the bill is now at.
So the bill, it passes a chamber. So like, for example, it passes the Senate. And then the conferees, they call them, the members of the conference committee of each chamber meet and they negotiate the differences. And then each of the conferees of each chamber go back to their chamber on the floor with the conference report and say, hey, this is what we all cooked up together.
Yeah, and then you vote on that new unified version of the bill in each chamber.
Gotcha. Yep. And that was a big deal with Ed Finance because a lot of people are upset that some stuff got added in the conference committee that wasn't in the initial bill, and that is technically a violation of procedure. And there were complaints made in both chambers about that over that bill, and those were sustained. And then there was a vote of those complaints. There's a fancier word for it that I'm not remembering. And
They suspended the rules.
Down.
Yeah, they voted to suspend the rules and push it through anyway.
Oh, that's what they did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
There's a whole series of rules about how these things work, and then they constantly vote to suspend the rules and send it across. Like on the veto session.
That is a thing you hear a little more often than I would have thought.
Suspend the rules?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the veto session, I think there's supposed to be a delay between when one chamber passes a bill and then sends it over to the next one. And so you vote to suspend the rules so somebody can walk it over to the other chamber to handle it immediately rather than wait the number of hours or days that are specified. And that happened in my session. We had a senator change his mind about how he was going to vote. And if you vote with the majority, you can request it, but there's a 24-hour delay. And so we had to vote on suspending the rules to allow the senator to do it then versus we all go home, we all come back, and basically he just does it the next day.
Wow. And there's a rules committee, right? Is that wrong? Did I invent that? Is that only in Congress?
I don't know.
I'm just kind of
There's
curious.
The committee on committees, but I don't.
No, that I know.
Yeah.
But I just got curious, like if they suspend the rules all the time, is there anyone thinking like, oh, maybe we should change them? But, probably not. Because you still want the rule by default in most cases. Yeah. All right. A little off script here. Okay, cool. We did a good job with the glossary of shame today, and I'm sure we'll have more shameful things to glossarize.
No doubt.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode.
Thank you all for listening.
Follow us between episodes for the latest updates on our socials at There's No A in Creemee on Instagram, Substack, and Blue Sky.
And catch us on our next episode of There's No A in Creemee, Vermont Politics, Culture, and Beyond in Apple Podcasts and Spotify.